This is GARIS, Masculist, MGTOW flyers. That is 2-3 page essays on the themes of masculism and MGTOW, written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. This is flyer number 395, entitled Pondering the Para. This is part 2. Carrying straight on. In the light of the above masculist background for the need for the legislation of the para, the rest of this flyer talks about the details of its implementation. Just how will the para be implemented? This is a nice juicy topic for a PhD student in gender studies, or in applied moral philosophy, or in law. Firstly, just what is the para, and what does it mean for a man to reject paternity? Just how would he do that? The details of the para will need to be studied closely, so its eventual legislation gets it more or less right the first time, so that subsequent laws do not have to modify it too much in order to close loopholes that societies exploit to get around the spirit of the law of the para. So just what is the para? It's the right of a man to reject an unwanted pregnancy, the same right that a woman has with the MARA, maternity rejection right, aka the abortion right. In today's world, in many countries, women have the MARA, so can abort an unwanted fetus up until a certain number of weeks into the pregnancy, where that number varies from country to country. A para would be expressed similarly in legal terms. Since I'm not an expert in legalese, I can only express myself in general terms. I foresee governments creating a paternity rejection form, that's a PR form, which a man fills in to reject an unwanted pregnancy, which he has to submit to the government before n weeks into the pregnancy. Otherwise, he and his girlfriend/wife both become automatically economically responsible for the well-being of the child thus born. If the man does submit the form, the PR form, on time, then if the woman continues with the pregnancy, she takes full financial responsibility for the well-being of the child. This is the para, the right, the legislated right of the man to reject an unwanted pregnancy, so that a woman does not have the power to manslave him for decades, thus committing a major gender crime against him. The lack of the para is one of the main reasons why masculists claim that women oppress men far worse than vice versa, because women's oppression of men is continuous and lasts decades. Oppressing men for decades of their lives, ruining their lives, simply because men don't have the para, whereas women have the mara. A gender injustice so blatant that it screams out for reform, and the masculists are screaming. If their demands are not soon met, these masculists will turn into soldiers, go out into the streets and shoot the feminazis, the gender politicians, and the fluffy feminist monoconscious divorce court lawyers and judges in a gender political bloodbath. Now come the complications that will cause intellectual headaches to the gender politicians who are legislating this bill, this PRR, paternity rejection right, para. These intellectual complications are suitable for study at universities as well. In fact, they should precede the parliamentary committee sessions of the gender politicians, so that the broad principles of the implementation of the para are already clear. But at the time of writing this masculist flyer, those principles are not fully clear in their details, so the rest of this flyer tries to deal with some of these complications. I deal with two broad cases in which a man may find himself when he submits a PR form. The first is when he and his girlfriend are childless, and this is the first pregnancy, often an unintended pregnancy and accident. If the man takes the para, that is, he submits a PR form, then he is now out of the equation, by right, by law. What happens next is up to the woman. If she aborts, then end of story. You could express the above and what is to follow in the form of a decision tree. That is, at each node in the graph, in brackets, using graph theory terminology, there is a question. For example, The woman aborts? Question mark. If yes, then the next node on the left branch would be end of story. But if no, the right branch would be to start looking at the nature of and decisions of the woman. For example, let us assume the woman has decided not to abort. Then she is asked the question, can she afford to raise the child on her own? That is she a FIP? Does she earn enough money by having gotten a career-competent education so that the child will not grow up in real poverty due to her mother being a career-incompetent fluffy? If the answer is yes, then on the left branch, the next node is the mother raises the child with her own money. End of story. But what if the mother is a real fluffy? For example, a black, dumb, low IQ'd, welfare queen type who has no economic skills and still wants to keep the pregnancy going. Then what? The government may decide that it doesn't want to force taxpayers to pay the career incompetent fluffy mother to raise her child, so imposes severe restrictions on the mother. That is, that if she does not abort as a single mother, with all the many powerful negative pressures on her not to go ahead with the pregnancy, in brackets, since single mothers raise children who are much more prone to problems such as alcoholism, drugs, crime, violence, vandalism, depression, etc. Close brackets. Then the government may assess the woman, decide that she is a career incompetent fluffy, and force the woman to put up the child for adoption, that is, punishing her for bringing a child into the world irresponsibly with no means to support it. Governments will be strongly influenced by masculist thinking, telling women that women must be FIPs or pay a very heavy price. But what if no one wants to adopt a kid from a bottom-of-the-barrel, low-class, low IQ'd, fluffy female? Then the government may be forced to put the child in a government home, thus telling the mother that if she continues with the pregnancy, she will lose the child anyway, so she may as well abort, since her later months of pregnancy are wasted effort, since she will lose the kid anyway. At this stage, one can imagine the feminists, the monoconscious feminazi type feminists, screaming, saying that men have to pay for the pregnancies that men are involved in, utterly overlooking the utter hypocrisy that they are expressing by saying that it's okay for women to have the mara, but it's not okay for men to have the para, with all its consequences. It's the right-hand branches of the para decision tree that will alarm the monoconscious feminazis. Just what questions and what policies will be implemented in the para decision tree are still not entirely clear and need to be further debated and discussed. Further ideas could be that if the woman is a repeat offender, e.g. a black welfare queen in the US who has been in her current pregnant, parried by her boyfriend situation before, then on the third offence she is legally sterilised by the government, which does not want any more useless eaters, as the Illuminati put it, an opinion I have a certain sympathy for, given my low opinion of blacks, with their average IQ levels being the lowest in the world and having the planet's highest crime rates. That is not a respect-worthy people. In the US, for example, many of the welfare queens are black women who churn out a dumb, low IQ'd black kid after kid, costing the taxpayers a fortune. Masculist thinking will influence governments to stop thinking, "Oh, the poor little woman who needs protection. So here you are, little woman. Here is some money paid to you by men, by male taxpayers, by male cash machines who work for you." This kind of thinking will die out as masculist ideas spread through the culture, influencing policy decisions, for example, on the implementation of the details of the para. Governments will become much tougher on women, expecting them, masculist style, to toughen up, to FIP up, or be spat at and treated badly by them and by society in general. Now, what about the second main category of women mentioned above, who gets pregnant and whose boyfriends/husbands do the para? Then what? The second main kind of woman is the married woman, who already has kids and wants another one, but the husband doesn't. The two of them fight over the issue, and eventually the husband does the para, thus forcing the woman to make tough decisions. If she aborts the kid, end of story, as above. If she doesn't abort and decides to take the pregnancy to term, then what? Can she afford to raise the new kid on her own? If yes, then she pays for that kid. Then the kid later gets to learn that his/her father did a para on him/her, which won't make the kid feel wanted. The father may decide that the unwanted pregnancy issue is so important to him that he wants a divorce over the issue, so that in a masculisted, men-fared, gender political era, he will get joint custody of the earlier kids, but not custody of the new kid, which goes to the mother. If the mother cannot afford the new kid as assessed by the government, then the kid will be put up for adoption, so that women are not encouraged to live off welfare and not have to bother to fip up, which in the eyes of a masculistic culture will seem a major gender political crime. In the present age, women feel that they have men around their little fingers when it comes to pregnancies that women want, that men don't want. This has to change, and that is why the masculists put such enormous emphasis on the importance of the legislation of the para. Social attitudes need to change. Government laws need to change so that men are not forced into decades-long manslavery by hated, fluffy parasite mothers who want kids and don't give a shit about the implication of their pregnancies on men. Such women are hated by masculists and will become targets for mass shooting if a sex war comes that will sweep away such massive decades-long gender crimes by women. There's also the complication of the phenomenon of global warming. One obvious solution to this massive problem is to radically reduce the size of the world population by giving men the para, so that the number of children born voluntarily, that is, by both the mother and father, is greatly reduced, so that the world population falls to about 1/10 of its current number. Once that happens, the pollution created by this much smaller population can be managed by the restorative powers of the earth. If not, then the population will need to be reduced even further. Thus, masculism is not the only force pushing for the legislation of the para. There is also the issue of global warming. Politicians today know almost nothing about masculism, so that politicians and political activists who are pushing for solutions to the global warming problem ought to learn more about masculism, since the passage of the para will go a long way towards solving their global warming problem. Giving men the para will obviously have quite an impact on the size of the world population, so that the global warming activists and the masculists should team up, become partners. The mascs can teach the greens to learn mascus ideas, so that a win-win situation is created, whereby the mascus gain an ally in the form of the greens, and the greens obtain a powerful means by which to implement their desires to stop global warming. As the greens spread the mascus message within themselves and to society, society learns more about mascus ideas to mutual benefit. In light of all the above, I think it should be fairly obvious that the legislation of the para will have a profound impact on the lives of millions of people, so is important, says I, an isolated professor, sitting literally in my armchair in my isolated study, sending this masculinist flyer, essay/video into cyberspace, where anyone can read it, watch it, enjoy. Cheers. Prof. Dr. Hugo de GARIS. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. Author of the book Masculism, Men's Rebellion Against Being Man-Slaves to Women, an e-textbook of 390 plus masculist flyers for men's studies courses. Freely downloadable in Microsoft Word format from my website. Ciao.